topic, Maggie's all excited about it. Today's topic is the linchpin. In other words, we're going to be talking about the thing that kind of holds together all the dynamics, or the things, the underlying currents that hold together the dynamics of our lives. And when these things shift, our whole experience of living shifts as well. So let's take a look at that. But before we get started, let's take a few minutes to just settle in and get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen just flooding your lungs and flowing into your bloodstream and nourishing every cell, every organ, bringing vital life energy throughout your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, any stress, any fatigue, any negativity. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating all your cells, electrifying your electrons and your molecules, and energizing you through and through and beyond your body. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, any remaining fatigue or stress, negativity. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very softly rub your fingers against your palms. Feel the tingling, the delicious sensation, the tickling, and bring yourselves present right here, right now, into this moment and your physical form. So, welcome, welcome, Tammy, and to everyone else who's joining us today. It's great to have you here. So, we're going to talk about the linchpin. A linchpin is something that would be used, for instance, on an axle of a wheel to hold the wheel in place. And sort of to lock it in. When you pull out the linchpin, the wheel falls off. So the idea here is that there are certain fundamental things in our issues, we'll say, in our beingness, that if they were to shift, our whole experience and expression of life would change. And so, an example of that is, let's say, I hate myself. If I hate myself, then the way that I express in life is going to be profoundly influenced by that attitude that I have toward myself. Welcome, Maria. How wonderful to have you here. Good morning. Ow, she just bit me on the nose. This is Maggie, for anybody who doesn't know her yet, and she is the star of the show. And she keeps me in line. I'm her favorite chew toy. Good morning, Isabel. Great to have you here. So, and good morning, Irma and Roslyn. Wonderful to have you guys here. And Roslyn just says hello to Maggie. I don't even rate anymore, but that's okay. I'm used to living in her shadow. Good morning, Robert. Great to have you here. Anyway, we're talking about the linchpin and looking at our internal dynamics, and identifying that one thing, if it were to change, that would change our entire experience. So if we're coming from a place of self-hatred, or deep lack of self-acceptance, how does that show up? It shows up. Hello, welcome, Dennis. Wonderful to have you here. How would it show up in the world? If I have self-hatred, the likelihood is that when there were circumstances where I was called to, or I had an opportunity to show up to be able to make a difference, maybe I wouldn't show up, because I would be telling myself that I'm no good, I'm not good enough to be able to step into the situation and do something productive in it, to have a positive influence. maybe it would show up in my lack of self-care. Maybe it would show up in just anger and resentment toward others, uh, because maybe I would see other people that are seemingly happier than I am, and I might feel more resentful, and that might come out in my communication with people, and um, I might retreat from engagement with people, and I might be abrupt with people. There are any number of ways that self-hatred or lack of self-esteem even. uh, Good morning, Abdullah Fattah. Wonderful to have you here. Um, so, uh, what if that were to shift? If Good morning, Andrea. Andrea, it's great to have you here. So, what would happen if that fundamental core experience of myself were to shift? If I shifted into self-love and self-appreciation, there are a multitude of things that would shift internally and externally. I might be willing to pursue my dreams. I might believe that I have, I might pursue opportunities that allow me to express my gifts. I might recognize my gifts and really look to nurture and share them. And I might be willing to step into the world with greater contribution. Maggie, no biting, no biting, no biting, no biting. She's pretty rambunctious this morning. So what when we have a deep sense of insecurity, this is maybe even an easier one to talk about. When we have a deep sense of insecurity, then we're not inclined to step out and be visible in the world. We're not inclined to speak up. We're not inclined to assert ourselves when people are treating us poorly. We might allow ourselves to be in situations that are abusive, for instance. And this pattern, this behavior, or this idea, this belief, might percolate over. In fact, it can't not percolate over into every interaction that we have. To be comparing ourselves against others rather than to just being able to be present with people, to be looking for instance after instance after instance where we can confirm that we are less than. And what I'm really talking about is this lens through which we view the world. So if we have an experience of ourselves, if we as victims, if we believe that we're a victim, then everybody in the world that we encounter is a victimizer. And what kind of relationships can we establish if that's the lens through which we're viewing the world? And so I'm wondering how we might identify these fundamental patterns so that we can relieve ourselves of them, so that maybe we can transform them. If we can identify, wow, that's sort of my operating system, then maybe we can become more aware of noticing it. If we allow ourselves not to um, if we allow ourselves not to believe this thing that we have operated from, but to identify it from a more objective standpoint, to notice, oh, wow, I have this lack of self-esteem. And how does it show up? It shows up in settling for a relationship that is non-fulfilling and perhaps uh, destructive, and to be settling for life situations that we're not happy with, to settle for jobs that we're not happy with, uh, to not be treating ourselves with respect and care. So I'm wondering what what kinds of places within yourself can you identify as like this linchpin thing that if it were to change, everything would change. So if I have a tremendous sense of lack of self-esteem, and if my self-esteem were to change, what would change? My relationships would change. Maybe the way I care for myself would change. Maybe the way that I appear in the world would change. I would stand differently. I would walk differently. My body would respond differently, potentially. Perhaps I would speak differently. I would have different interactions with people. I might change jobs. I might change relationships. I, you see where this is going, right? So what can you identify in your life that is one of these primary themes? I think for me, a long time ago, I really did experience myself as a victim. And as a result, I was always in a defensive mode, because if you perceive yourself as a victim, there's always a bracing against the assaults and onslaught of the world around you, right? You have to protect yourself all the time, and that's exhausting. And you also would have suspicions of anybody and everybody in the world. If if the fundamental idea is the world is out to get me, that's another version of victimhood. Then there's a constant sense of defense. Um, if I believe, another one for me was uh, feeling like an outsider, a sense of not belonging. And what happened as a result of that feeling of not belonging and of being an outsider was that I I alienated myself from groups and engagements and involvements, because I identified as an outsider, and I used to anticipate that people would not like me. Uh, I would also find internal dynamics to justify my being separate. And it's interesting, like this outsider thing often shows up in being feeling insecure and over secure all at the same time, like feeling less than and better than all at the same time. It's like I'm feeling less than because I'm not involved in the group, or I'm not part of it, and then I'm feeling better than because who wants to be in that group anyway, which is really just a defense. So you can see where, like, the inner dynamic is something that's projected outward, and we do have these themes. So Irma says, my idea of lack of capability and inaction, since the idea that I'm not good enough, then why even try? That's such a classic, Irma. So, I'm not good enough. I can't be good enough at this. So why even bother? So I have ideas and I don't act or follow up on them because them, I keep closed to receiving and creativity. Yeah. So if we have this notion of we're not good enough, then we close ourselves off to all kinds of possibility. And the idea is this lack of capability, this idea of I'm not good enough, or I don't know enough, or I don't count somehow, uh, brings us into situations where we either um, oh, elevate others at our own expense, or and falsely, what can happen is that we believe everybody else knows better than we do, and therefore we're not really discerning in the associations and affiliations that we have. So if we have that lack of self-esteem, oftentimes we won't trust our own knowing, and we'll defer to other people when we shouldn't be deferring to other people. So Rosalind says, I've become aware that I have something to prove or validate the decisions I've made, or validate that the decisions I've made are justified as a result of circumstances. Since letting go of those judgments or expectations, it's been freeing, and I no longer feel exhausted. This exhaustion thing is a huge, huge part of so many of these internal dynamics, especially when we feel that the world is a dangerous place, or people are out to get us, or we're a victim, or we have to prove something. There's always this energy that is consumed as we monitor ourselves, or are constantly policing our own actions, and trying to, being in this constant battle of trying to prove ourselves, and that's the oppositional kind of experience, right? If we make this us and them, or me and the rest of the world kind of uh, polarity, it is truly exhausting. And so the thing that I want to invite you to play with is that these underlying dynamics are if you could think of it as a program, and then look at it as a faulty program, that maybe rather than as something that's true, even though you've spent a lifetime potentially finding validation for that perspective. What if you started entertaining other ideas? What if you actively took on some behaviors and practices that would start dismembering the old program, that would say, okay, here, I recognize this program, because recognizing it is the first step to being able to change it, for sure, because without awareness of it, it just runs, and that becomes our experience. We become immersed in it as if that's the truth and that's reality. When we start recognizing, oh my gosh, here it's at play in this interaction, and it's at play in this moment, and oh my gosh, here I am just sitting by myself running all these stories in my head that's confirming to me how incapable I am, or how incompetent I am, or and wow, I just noticed that. Noticing it is the first step. And when you start noticing it, then you can begin to start challenging it. You don't necessarily want to go on, face on. We talked a while ago about the bully in the brain. These programs are essentially the bully in the brain. And you don't necessarily need to interact with the bully. You can just sort of recognize the bully and say, hey, guess what? We're not playing today. So Rosalind says, GIGO, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. My program upgrade is to change the input, and the change starts from me. 100%, Rosalind. Thank you for that. GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, is a programming term, and we are talking about programming here. We do get a reboot. We do get the opportunity to write our own program. It's not necessarily easy. It can be very simple, but it's not necessarily easy because it's so ingrained and most of the times completely invisible. So the intention of this conversation is to start bringing the invisible visible so that we can then deliberately begin to recreate or reconfigure the program so that it is more life affirming, and the result is that that the processor, that's us, doesn't have to work quite as hard to defend and protect. Ultimately, once we get the program reconfigured. So just thinking about other areas, the things that we tell ourselves, oh my gosh, it's just remarkable to me, the things that we tell ourselves and the impact of them. I was talking to a friend yesterday who was saying, the things that work for other people don't work for me. And it's interesting because I can relate to that idea, is that I've tried all these different things that other people try, and other people get great results, and I haven't seen great results. And so it reinforced this idea that what works for other people doesn't work for me, which can be extrapolated to nothing works for me, and that's a dangerous place to be. So taking this idea of something that what works for other people doesn't work for me is maybe say, I've noticed that in a number of situations, what's worked for other people doesn't necessarily work for me, and I'm finding things that work for me, or I'm still exploring things that work for me, and maybe these things work for me in a different way than they work for other people. Looking at our internal dialogue to create scenarios that are more supportive and ideas that are more supportive. And I know, unfortunately, I know multiple people who have pretty constant challenges with pain. And for myself, they I have been through periods, thankfully, that were very limited, where I was experiencing pain. And what I noticed is that during those times when I was telling myself I'm in pain, I'm in pain, I'm in pain, I was I was exacerbating the pain, literally confirming and enhancing, exacerbating the pain. When I, instead of identifying it as pain per se, if I started to allow myself to sink into the experience of the sensation, then it was a different experience. Now that takes a lot of concentration, and it takes a lot of attention, and I don't know of anything more exhausting than being in perpetual pain. It wears on body and soul in so many ways, and takes a deliberate act of redirection to put attention in, either deeper into the sensation, or to put the attention into something that is uplifting, that distracts from that experience of pain. And one of the things that I am aware of is that nothing is constant, even when we feel like we are in constant pain or we're constantly depressed. The thing is that it's not constant. It's just that every time we notice the pain or we notice the depression, then we say, oh, it's still here, rather than, oh, now I'm aware of it again. Because I don't necessarily know when it's not there, when I'm not aware of it, if it's actually there or not. And so as we can start chipping away at, so this idea, for instance, of insecurity is like to say, I'm always insecure, or I always feel like a victim. When we speak in universals like always and never, uh, it's not true. So I'm going to say never is anything always true, and I understand the paradoxical nature of speaking that, but I don't know that there are any constant constants other than change, perhaps. And you may find an exception to that statement, but when we recognize that what we perceive as a constant state is actually not constant, it allows us to start dissolving the hold that that state has on us. And that may be a beginning to how we can start removing this linchpin of a foundational belief or experience or conversation or program that is fundamentally destructive to us. So I invite you to explore that, and also to explore, as you identify these foundational programs, to explore what would be different if that weren't the operating system. What would be different in the way that I interact with my time, in my what would be different in the way that I interact with my relationships? What would be different in the way that I interact with the things that I do in life? And I invite you to just explore what would be different if that weren't true. Okay, if it weren't true that I'm not worthy, for instance, what would be different? And allow yourself to actively explore that. And what happens is that it starts pulling the legs out from under that belief that the things that are allowing you to believe that belief is true, because beliefs are just beliefs. And so Rosalind says the idea of being depressed or clinically diagnosed as being depressed, constant check in with self could look like setting a timer every hour to remind self to check in. What you might, and I've actually prescribed that to clients, is check in, set an alarm and check in. Where are you right now? What you might find is that you're not depressed all the time. You were just generalizing that you're depressed. So what does one do from here once they become aware of mistruths? We get to explore new possibilities. And wonderful to have you here, Elaine. I just looked at the clock and I have an appointment in 1 minute. So I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you for engaging. This is such a wonderful venue, and it is such a privilege to be spending this time with you every weekday morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live every weekday morning on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page, and I encourage you to check out the other awesome programming and community there. It is such a privilege to be with you. So until next time, much, much love, and we can reprogram ourselves.